Elites, Food, and All the Morals in Between, presented by Sofia Nawaz. Introduction. Elites in the Mughal and Qing empires enjoyed a rather specific diet. For instance, Emperor Akbar had rosewater infused in his vegetables, and Emperor Kangxi only ate cooked foods delivered by upper-class members. Many historians have looked over both distinguished meals and nobles in these empires. However, one missing link common amongst historical research is the proposed intentions and morals within these civilizations. What morals can be revealed of the Qing and Mughal elites through the lens of food? In my research, I have been able to deduct the missing link between intentions and food, as far as the Mughal and Qing elites go. The intentions and morals I will be discussing regard the reasoning behind why they acted a specific way. By analyzing the cuisine of the Mughal Empire from 1556 to 1605 and the Qing Empire from 1636 to 1722, I have concluded that both of the empire's elites acted out of vanity. However, Mughals did this through inclusive charitable acts, while the Qing performed exclusive grandiose acts. The Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire, with all its tolerance, still held many social hierarchies depending on religion. The Mughal Empire dates back to 1526 with its founder Babur. However, the more widely known emperor is Akbar. Under Akbar's rule from 1556 to 1605, the empire expanded tremendously, ultimately covering modern-day northern India. In Akbar's empire, Akbar was considered the most elite member, followed by his court officials and imams, those who led Islamic prayers. Merchants and peasants were much further down the social chain. However, for the Hindu religion, the caste system determined elite status. While Akbar was still on top socially, Brahmins, Hindu priests, and Kshatriyas, Hindu warriors, followed. Similarly, merchants and peasants came next, but were referred to as Vaishyas and Sudras. Akbar reorganized the government and financial system to be more centralized and even included non-Muslims in his administration. By showcasing religious tolerance for all, whether it be Hindus, Jains, Sikhs, or Zoroastrians, he soon was approved of by the public. Additionally, Mughal culture has been well recorded in part due to Akbar's patronage of the arts. Mughal food culture. Regardless of elitism, Mughal food culture is consistent for both elites and non-elites. For instance, both Mughal elites and non-elites had similar ingredients embedded in their diets. Rice was a major staple in everyday life, often paired with broths, meats, and vegetables. A dry bread was also typically added on the side. These foods took an especially long time to prepare, some of them as long as the night prior. As for simpler foods like fruits and nuts, the Mughal people enjoyed a vast array of fresh or dried apricots, melons, and apples, along with cashews and almonds. Mughal diets were also varied in respect to religion. The Muslim religion allowed for the consumption of beef, mutton, and poultry, but not pork or shellfish. On the other hand, most Hindus were vegetarian and considered beef to be sacred. In this sense, Hindus also established ascetic norms towards food. Both the Kama Sutra and the Dhammastra, two ancient texts regarded as the code of conduct and guidelines for Hindus, discuss the temptation behind gluttony. Due to this difference, chicken and lamb were served at dinner parties, but vegetarian dishes were primarily served. While Hindus did approach food with austerity by avoiding meats and overconsumption, both Hindus and Muslims indulged in food for medicinal and spiritual purposes. Ayurvedic and Unani are the Hindu and Muslim natural medicinal systems. They categorize the human body into three parts with food that healed each category. Consuming food for a specific category was said to help with balancing and centering and could affect personality and emotions as well. Medicinally inspired food consumption was seen as an average part of healthy life in Mughal times. With that in mind, there were major differences to be noted in the actual meals of the elites and non-elites. Meals in the Mughal Empire. Even though traditions stay consistent, the meals in Mughal India were highly determined by status. Elite members had the luxury of balancing simple and grand meals. For example, Islam Khan Chisti, a general during the 1610s, preferred to eat simpler meals of jowar and bajra, bread and millets, sag, vegetables or spinach, and bhat, dry rice. Emperor Akbar also did this and was often seen eating meals privately in a very humble nature. It is recorded that no matter how simple elites ate, they still refrained from certain food. For upper caste Hindus, onion, garlic, and cooked rice had to be handled in a very careful method for it to be eaten. There was a belief that once polluted, for instance, when handled by a lower classman, the food will lose its purity. However, none of this stopped the elites from eating extravagantly. In Mughal India, large banquets were held in honor of generals and the emperor. They spared no expense, with 1,000 plus dishes and halls, quote, elaborately and expensively decorated, end quote, as Father Montserrat, who was a Portuguese Jesuit invited to Akbar's court, put it. There was even an expectation for having clean feet before entering, white tablecloths and flower bouquets scattered throughout the hall. Beautiful women were servers, and a vast array of globally renowned cooks made the meals. Because of this, European pastries and delicacies often made an appearance during these parties. While most villagers never had the chance to try a European dessert, it is significant to note that the lower classmen were well fed in Mughal India. For instance, soldiers of Islam Khan Chisti were provided with 1,000 dishes every 24 hours, consisting of fried rice, meat, spinach, broth, vegetables, and 12 variations of dry bread. Although the lower classmen were not invited to lavish banquets, the royal courts would often have free food stands. It was here that the townspeople could enjoy meals in honor of Akbar. Mughal intentions. Based on the differences in elite and non-elite meals and actions, the underlying intentions and morals of elites can be drawn. The Mughal court did not provide food stands for the lower class, but they also donated grants to assist with things like marriage costs or income loss, which were seen as vital deeds of nobility. Nobles provided common folk with basic life necessities as a form of charity, thus increasing the overall quality of living in the Mughal Empire. However, not everything was done kindly. Foreigners were often gifted by the royal court, but it was deemed protocol to reciprocate with one's own gift, according to Sir Thomas Roe, who was an English ambassador to the Mughal court. During his visit, India had rejected trade alliances with the English, describing their goods as unimpressive and lackluster. This shows an alternate side to Mughal intent behind their actions, one that is much more critical than meets the eye. Mughal rulers often portrayed themselves as simple and humble to foreigners, but were logical with their hospitality. This showcases that their actions were performed to gain public adoration and love. This would make it easier to rule and control people. In this case, there were few social upheavals during Akbar's reign, most likely due to the approval rates of elites. The intentions did not differ far from the Qing, however, were approached differently. The Qing Empire. While the Qing Empire was advanced and flourishing, it held a strict social hierarchy. The empire was established by the Shunzi Emperor in 1636, with Kangxi as its second emperor. While the empire now is associated with China, they were not originally Chinese and referred to as Manchu instead. In Kangxi's empire, elites and upper class members were considered to be emperor's family and included well-educated scholars, government officials, nobles, and generals. Socially, artisans, farmers, and slaves followed. Under Kangxi's rule, stability blossomed after years of war. He was keen on opening new ports and markets for Western and overseas trading, leading to a silver influx and economic growth. Once Kangxi fell ill and passed after one of his banquets, Yongzhen was announced emperor. Qing food culture. Unlike the Mughals, Qing cuisine varied more according to social status, access to ingredients, and influence from religion. Just like the Mughals, the king relied on rice as the staple of their diet. Rice was typically paired with meat ranging from pig, chicken, and duck. Potatoes and corn, introduced from the Americas, were also popular for both elites and non-elites. Tea was a common choice of drink as it was believed to have digestion benefits. Confucianism was the official religion of the Qing Empire, thus influencing Qing cuisine. In Confucianism, there was stress on thoroughly cooking food, sauces, and seasoning. It was vital to have this blend to create the harmony that was fundamental in the religion. Food must also be eaten in smaller servings to increase the intention behind eating it. Quote, everything in moderation, end quote, was certainly applicable to Confucian dining. Taoism, like Confucianism, also relied on harmony when it came to food. Yin foods were seen as cold and refreshing, like vegetables. Yang foods were considered hot, like meats and broths. To create perfect harmony, you need a blend of both. So vegetarianism was promoted, but not preferred. Taoists also fasted regularly or achieved Ziran, where it was believed no food consumption would be needed. Along with this, it is important to examine Buddhism's influence on cuisine as well, as it was the fastest expanding religion during the time. It is a common belief to, quote, do no harm, end quote, as a follower of Buddhism, causing more people to be vegetarian. Therefore, meat and fish were considered prohibited, but some parts of China also prohibited onion, garlic, and leek for their smell. Influenced by the Ayurvedic medicinal systems in beginning Buddhism, Buddhists also refer to specific foods as medicinal and ate with the intention of reaching enlightenment. With diets varying the religion, they varied even further based on status. Meals in the Qing Empire. On top of those distinctions, elitism only made Qing meals more disparate. Elites had every sort of food at their disposal. What little meat and wine were available was given priority to elites and nobles. The best teas and meals were served, and they were incredibly flavorful, but once again, they were only for the wealthy. Elites enjoyed these dishes through numerous banquets. Banquets were so popular and prestigious that many people overspent and acquired debt for the sake of holding one. During the parties, it was not only important to have the best food available, but good entertainment was a necessity. Sir George Staunton, who was a diplomat in Macartney's embassy while visiting China, describes in his account, quote, "This banquet was preceded by a ball and accompanied by illuminations and fireworks in the garden," end quote. Overall, elites were able to experience operas, poetry, women, gardens, and exquisite food at these feasts. Nevertheless, it was an entirely different story for non-elites. Some rural locations in China were so impoverished and infertile that the population had to resort to an improper diet of pumpkins and salted fish. Poultry was an important dietary aspect that many peasants didn't have access to because of shortages originating in the Ming era, thus increasing the demand for the cost of meat. The lower classmen had much more restricted diet compared to the extravagant meals of the upper class. Common folk felt confined to what they had and did their best not to dwell on the delicacies they will never taste. Regardless, lavish meals were dreamed about regularly by the non-elite people, as seen in poems. For example, Zhao Feng's poem, Shi Xia, expresses, quote, "For 20 years, my craving for crabs hasn't been satisfied," end quote, and proceeds to describe them in great detail. This showcases the limitations non-elites were faced with. In contrast to the accessibility to food elites had but didn't share. Qing intentions. The differences in elites versus non-elites meal display a connection with morals. Qing elites did little to give back to the peasantry. There is little to no mention in sources from the time period of sharing, charity, donations, nothing of the sort. It is clear that Qing peasants were not regarded highly in both the empire and internationally. Instead, they mainly focused on impressing others through their wealth, as a way to build their social status. This reveals the true individualistic nature of the Qing elites. They were self-absorbed and self-preserving, focused on vanity rather than the common good. This mistreatment and neglect towards non-elites ultimately led to the riots targeting Qing elites, especially through the mid-1700s. Conclusion. In this regard, we have seen multiple comparisons and contrasts between Mughal and Qing empires. Their meals were often very similar, eating a more vegetarian-based diet with rice at its core. But how the elites typically ate, that's where things deviated. The Mughal nobles ate humbly, while the Qing elites were excessive with their meals. The Mughals were also remarked for sharing their food, while the Qing did not, even in times of famine and hunger. While this highlights the Mughals as charitable, generous people, that isn't the case. Both of the elites acted out with intentions of self-interest. The Mughals wanted to appear particularly kind and to have others regard them better. The Qing elites worked in the same way. They strived to appear grander and to be considered better than other elites. This says a lot about both cultures. While both are invested in self-interest, the Mughals achieve it through philanthropy, while the Qing achieve it by one-upping others. Lastly, here are my references that I used during the presentation. And that is the end. Thank you so much for your time.